Gil, it is great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So, here we're going to be talking about the shift in leadership for the fifth industrial revolution. And this episode is going to be going out on day one of Davos. But for us, during the time of recording, we woke up to the news that President Trump had captured Venezuela's president, which was pretty shocking for the majority of people. But my reaction wasn't so much shock. I kind of just sat back and went, huh, isn't that interesting? I mean, absolutely shocking, of course. I mean, this probably wouldn't have happened 5, 10 years ago. But the kind of shocks that I was then imagining from that, I was very curious. I leaned in and I was like, okay, what are the shocks that are going to be happening here on communities, commerce, capital, industries, supply chains, et cetera, et cetera. So I was thinking to myself, okay, so I've got you on the podcast coming up. How do you think, from your perspective globally, this is going to affect 2026 and how the shifts are going to happen in the world?
So I think we need to look at the big context, or start with the big context. And if we look at the big context, is that we have had in the world four primary forces that have shaped the world over time. Those are technology, demographics, geopolitics, and area of sustainability. And when we look at those primary forces, they have evolved over many years, centuries, in different speeds, different magnitude. And what we learned over the years, that the intersection of the waves of change that they've created basically the megatrends. And so when you look at megatrends, they have long longevity. They are not 12 months or 6 months or 2 years. They have long longevity. So that's one aspect of the context. The other aspect of the context is that change disruption is not anything new.
Mm.
But when we look at the last 5 years post the pandemic, we can see that the nature of change has changed dramatically. And we see it, what we call it NAVI, nonlinear, accelerated, volatile, and interconnected. And when we look at it overall, it basically has supercharged the waves of change and created different types of megatrends. So when we look at January specifically, it's a moment in time, right? It's not something that you look at it in a silo. You look at it in a big context. When you look at it in a big context, it's a moment in time, and it is what you described, a very good example and another demonstration of something that is volatile, something that is nonlinear, not expected, as you said, that is accelerated, that creates kind of ripples of impact across the world. And so I would say what we have seen in the last 5 years in terms of events or nature of change that is nonlinear, accelerated, volatile, and interconnected, we are going to continue to see it in 2026 and beyond.
Hmm. Hmm. Fair. So, in terms of how you and your organization consults and guides, coaches, strategizes with CEOs, how is it? How are they preparing? How do they need to prepare? What's going on in that particular area?
So, look, our point of view is that a lot of the traditional and established approaches and practices and assumptions around strategy and risk management, transformation,
Mm.
have become kind of inadequate and not fit for purpose
Mhm.
in a NAVI world. And so, if you look anything from, as I said, transformation transformation roadmaps, to risk frameworks, to governance systems that we have built over the past, several decades, when it was more predictable
Mm.
in an every world that do not fit for purpose. And there are several examples for this as well. And so what we believe is that business leaders, government leaders need to truly rethink the foundations in order to move forward. And rethink is a very deep cognitive exercise. It's not easy. It's not, oh, I'll take the weekend to rethink something. It's a process. And so rethinking a lot of our traditional legacy system, business assumptions, best practices that we have had in the business world over decades, it's really required now. So that's one thing. The other one is we should take, as business leaders, we should take some what we call no regret moves. So what kind of actions we can take right now that, and we're not going to regret in the future because they are right at any time. And those can be anything from in terms of supply chain resiliency, for example. And then the other thing in terms of the no regret moves is how we adapt our current operations to respond in a more agile way, to be more resilient, to be more flexible. Because again, if we look at the NAVI world, it is volatile, it is interconnected, it is nonlinear, and that's one of the bigger changes is it's the nonlinearity that we see in the market. The other thing and that would be my last point on this question, is it's important to look at the convergence, to look at the interconnectivity of the trends that we see in the market. No trend is in a silo. Everything is impacting each other, and the pace of change is quite, I would say, quite fast right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One of the things that I talk about in my book, Aftershock to 2030,
Yes.
is that CEOs, organizations aren't ready for this. And one of the things that I put forward, which is a very aggressive term, is that I explain to the people, you're operating in a war room where things are changing all the time. You can't be complacent. You can't sit back and relax. You've got to look at all of these changes. And I love the language that you use is to rethink the foundations, and that there's the cognitive load that is required, and the work, the level of work that has to be done to make those shifts actually happen.
Yes.
So I read a data point, and I cannot for the life of me at this moment remember the data, but I think most organizations don't believe that I'd say 65 or 68% of organizations do not feel that they are ready for this new era. Mm-hmm. Do you have data that says something different or better?
No, I do not. I don't remember the percentage specifically, but you're absolutely correct in terms of the sentiment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what's the way forward? Because my book talks about the cognitive aspect as well, which is that people need to completely change their mindsets in this new paradigm, in this new era. So my question to you is how do you, or how does your organization, or how would you advise CEOs and organizations and leaders to adapt?
So look, I think there are different capabilities that we need to acquire as leaders. I think one example is the notion of system thinking, or the practice of system thinking, because someone said before that design thinking is good for complicated problems, but system thinking is for complex problems. And obviously what we see in the world today is that the world is much more complex. And I think the practice of system thinking, especially because there's so many dependencies and complexities, is extremely important. For example, I don't know how many MBA programs teach system thinking, but it's becoming something that is more important. Tom Friedman call it the policing area, right? And so one of the areas that I think system thinking is becoming even more important is the building and managing ecosystems. I don't think any player can do it alone. And it's not anything new that in the business world, the importance of networks and ecosystems is important, but I think it's even important now. And we need to think about ecosystems in a different way. It's not just a set of alliances, it's how you actually orchestrate those alliances, how you build ecosystems that are much more fluid, that can be formed sometimes on an issue by issue based coalitions. And you can think about it even, and I wouldn't say it's now, but you can think not far from now when you will have autonomous agentic companies, and how you build an ecosystem with this type of players, right? And so the task of building, managing, orchestrating an ecosystem is becoming much more substantial, and I think system thinking will help in the capability of it. Um, I think that as we talked before in terms of the NAVI world, we need capabilities of strategic foresight. We need supply chain resilience. We need, as we talked before, about rethinking established and traditional practices. We need to think about what we call as the superfluid enterprise. And that's not something that happens overnight. It will take some time to move to that type of enterprise. But the question is the enterprise of today that we have known for decades in terms of the org charts and the foundations, does this structure still fit for purpose? And my argument is that it's not, and we need to think much more what we call a superfluid enterprise, much more dynamic, with less hierarchy, much more in terms of network distributed based. And so taking this mindset and starting to think how you move your organization towards becoming a superfluid enterprise is I would say it's probably another ingredient. The other thing that we can talk about is disruptive innovation and disruptive innovation that like Christensen came out in the mid-90s and still very important. But we need to look at it and say, what is the next evolution of disruptive innovation that fits in every world? And so I know I probably put a lot of answers in one answer into your question, but those are some of the things that I think business leaders should think about.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And a lot of people say, surely this is just a VUCA world. And the issue with people thinking that it is just VUCA is that it's almost like people need to, this is my opinion, adjust to actually it is different. And there are lots of other terms out there. This is your term, this is your organization's term of with NAVI, which I think is beautifully done because it helps people understand that because VUCA was all about the time at post-Cold War, that particular era, and everything has changed so much, as you quite rightly say, since COVID. But how do you describe to somebody when they're saying, "Well, isn't this just VUCA?" How do you help them understand, ideally in one sentence, why it is important right now that they adjust their mindset to this new paradigm, this new acronym, this new style?
So first, we don't say that VUCA is gone. What we say it's a VUCA plus, and that's the NAVI, right?
VUCA plus, nice.
So VUCA on its own, the term that was created after the Soviet Union fell and then was adopted by the business world, just again doesn't fit for purpose anymore in the world that we live, especially post-pandemic when we see the nature of change different. And that's why we came with the term NAVI, because we believe it better describes the nature of change in the world. So you can say that we're not erasing VUCA, but VUCA on its own cannot exist anymore. And that's why the NAVI is becoming. And so the importance is to understand that the nature of change is different. And if you live in the nature of change of the late 90s or the early 2000s, you miss the point because it's very different now. And one of the things that we are talking about, what we call our work on megatrends, we call it futures reimagined. And why is it in plural? Because there's no one future. There's no one linear path from now to whatever future you think will be. There are multiple futures. And so, again, that's part of the mindset, is to understand that the possibilities and in terms of futures are multiple and not just one. And you need to think how you work towards that.
Is that relating to the work that you're doing this year, specifically on new frontiers? Is that the same thing?
So we took an approach this year of what we call chapters in a book. and which means that we are releasing the chapters first and then creating the book, mainly because the change is so fast. And so having just a book in one given time is probably not great. And so the first chapter that we released, it's actually a cluster of chapters that we released last November, in November of 2025. The next cluster that we're releasing is about the frontiers, and that will be the week before Davos. But that's another cluster of chapters in the series of futures reimagined. So it's not just it's not that we changed the work; it's just another series of chapters that are being released, and we put them in different clusters because to create some, I would say, themes that connect the megatrends that we decided to focus on.
So what would you say that if you can share, because obviously by the time this is aired, this is going to be the chapters will have been released.
Right.
What do you say about what New Frontiers are actually about?
The new frontiers are about the new resources, and some of the resources are obvious, like talent, and some resources are probably less obvious to some people, and those resources, like from the perspective of trust. And I think, but even when you look at those new resources, you need to also understand how to reframe them, because the reframing of them will help you strategically to take the right set of actions. And so, for example, the first resource we talk about is the resource of talent. But you need to think about talent and reframe your thinking about talent as a portfolio of human and machine capabilities. It's not anymore just humans, right? And so the whole aspect, what does it mean? It means that the whole aspect of learning is different than what we have known so far. And again, that's part of the rethink that I talked before about. That from a migration perspective, that's another resource, a new frontier. And again, migration is not new, but we see different types of migrations happening, legal and illegal migrations that are happening because of climate migrations, geopolitics migration, et cetera, et cetera. And as a business leader, I would like leaders to reframe it as economic infrastructure. And that's, look at it as a strategic asset that requires investments and planning, and not just within your company, but also in the communities that you operate in, or other the communities of your employees and your consumers, and so on. Trust needs to be framed from a challenge to an asset as well. And an asset that you need to invest in, you need to measure, you need to monetize, etc. So trust is becoming kind of a hard currency in the world of NAVI. And the other things that we're talking about is the kind of the new race that we have, or the renewed race that we have for tangible and intangible natural resources in space, in the Arctic, in deep sea, and deep earth. So these are kind of the thinking that we have about the new frontiers, as business leaders need to think about them through different lens and much more strategically and much more proactively than reactively. And maybe a couple of examples about it is when you look at the AI revolution, I think we can look at it as an infrastructure play. It's not just a technology, it's an infrastructure play, just like another foundational utility that is based on compute and energy and data centers. And we need to understand what does it mean to have better access, better control of those resources in the infrastructure play. Another example from a talent perspective is if we have hybrid teams of human and agents, is we need to better understand what does it mean from productivity, how we look at productivity over here, what does it look from scaling, how do we do completely rethinking on how we drive teamwork, foster teamwork, evaluate outputs, incentivize teams that are hybrid teams, and so on. And so this is how we manage such teams, right? And I always like to give the example, as a business leader, let's say I had 50 team members in my team. I've known over the years how to manage a team like that, how to incentivize, how to foster teamwork, collaboration, productivity, and so on. What's happened if now I have 10 people and 50,000 agents in my team?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's changing dynamics, right? As a leader, I need to know, how do I incentivize? How do I manage? How do I foster? How do I drive productivity in the era of intersection of human and machine? And that leads me to another point, which is neuroscience. And that's quite important to better understand the science of neuroscience and the implications in the business world. Because when you talk about human and machine together, there are a lot of impacts, or you can trigger better work. And as we talk, how we augment humans with machines, we need to understand how the brain works, how to trigger certain behaviors, both in the physical environment and non-physical environment, in order to truly be able to augment ourselves.
Gil, I think you're the first person I've come across that will actually talk about the human cognition and how they're able to approach all of these challenges simultaneously. It's wonderful. And as you know, I talk about that in my book. So I want to ask the question, it's like CEOs will often, not always, but will often look at how leaders just need to deliver all of these things. It's like, just like it's on a spreadsheet, it's on a strategy document,
Yeah,
it's to
yeah.
solve those, but without realizing there needs to be that neuroplasticity, that
Mhm.
a mindset shift on how everything now works or has to work moving forward, and to have that
Right.
flexibility, neuroflexibility, if we can call it that for a moment, to be able to make those changes in those rapidly evolving geopolitical, environmental, organizational systems that whereby, and I'm working on something very similar right now, whereby
Mhm.
organization has to do a shift
Yes.
major shift in their organization, major cuts, and the organization isn't quite ready mentally or from an intellectual perspective to understand the capabilities that they can evolve into if they incorporate AI. So would you say that's a very common thing, or is this where do you think we're at the beginning of 2026, and where do you think we're going to get to by the end of 2026?
I think we're in the very early days. I think,
Mm,
first of all, innovation exceeds adoption, as we see with AI. And
mm,
so the pace of innovation and the capabilities is much faster than we can adopt.
yeah.
I don't see, and I haven't done any research about it, so just anecdotally, I would say, I don't see yet the full understanding of how the impact on the human behavior, on the human brain, and how we can trigger the right behavior in terms of the true intersection of human and machine. And so, and I think from other leadership skills, and we talked about it before in terms of the notion of having doubt or uncertainty.
Mm.
How we are trained very differently as business leaders, or have been trained as business leaders, about certain aspects that, in terms of behavior, that again were maybe good for before, but today they need to change.
Mm. Most leaders won't understand, and this sounds very negative, I'm so sorry, but most won't understand just what they need, what type
Yeah.
of teams or coaches or strategists. I don't know what. So I think I should ask you, who which people do they need, do CEOs need in their organization to make this shift?
Hey, look, I think we need to evolve, right?
Mm,
Type of people, I don't know. But in terms of, if you look at the HR function or talent function, obviously that is changing dramatically. If you look at the productivity functions, that's changing dramatically. If you look at the combination of HR or talent and technology, that's changing a lot. And
mm,
so I think what people might want to think is the both the capability that they have within the organization, but also how they look at their ecosystem
mm,
and building an ecosystem that can complement them and help them to grow.
mm,
And also look at something that we have done at EY, for example, is you have your board, which is extremely important. But do you have an advisory council of people who are completely not, are completely free to voice anything that they can about different aspects, such as innovation, for example?
mm,
And do you leverage such advisory councils in terms of different aspects of your organization? So
mm,
anyway, this is just an idea that I like because I think there's a lot of talent and intelligence in the world that the board is here to do certain things and obviously provide guidance and governance, etc., with the CEO. But the CEO can also enjoy an independent advisory council on however he or she wants to shape it, and on what agenda they want to, to create for them. But
mm.
but I think the more we reach out, the more we bring the outside in, the better.
I like your thinking there. I'm really curious. We just mentioned, you mentioned that we're just in the innovation stage right now, and our human capability isn't able to keep up with the innovation that's happening around us and the change that's happening around us. If you had a statement or a warning statement maybe for organizations, what would you say they have to do by the end of 2026?
You cannot sit on the sideline. It's not an wait and see. It's do now. And yes, you'll make mistakes. We all make mistakes. But you have to take action. You have to move. You have to deploy. You have to adopt. You have to adapt. Um, it is, and you have, as we talked before, you have to rethink. It's not a hobby. It is must be in the DNA of every organization. Now, the wait and see, the gap just will continue to widen.
Mhm. Yeah, I believe that. When you speak with leaders in this realm, uh, what what are the tells? And actually, this might be something you're not able to talk about, but let's see. What are the tells of, where they're just not ready and they're like a deer in headlights that they just aren't able to do it? I mean, you're probably experiencing that. We talked about the 68%, if 68% of organizations aren't doing it. What are the tells? So hopefully somebody that's listening to this is going to say, okay, I'm actually there right now. I need to make a change right now.
So again, I haven't done any research. EY has done, but I don't remember the numbers from the top of my
Mhm.
head. But I think what I can maybe talk about is what I like to say is my top 10 list of what you need to think about and what you need to do. And unlike what we saw on different shows, it's not by any order of priority. So you can design your priority as you wish, but I think you need to take all those top 10 and truly embrace it, the list. And so the first thing we talked about is the rethink of legacy systems, business assumptions, best practices that we have leaders have had for many years. And we truly need to kind of shake the tree a little bit right now. And it's everything from strategy to operating models to risk frameworks to the transformation process itself. So that's number one. Number two, and again, you and I talked about it before, is the embrace uncertainty. And I think as leaders, we have been trained, you have to convey certainty, you have to know the North Star, you have to know how to clearly what are the next steps to get to the North Star, etc. Well, in the NAVI world, uncertainty is just a reality. And we need to embrace it. And uncertainty has a lot of advantages as well. That's actually where the brain works, where we learn, when we produce in terms of thinking. And we need to have the ability as leaders to say, I don't know. I will get advice, I will learn. And so that's the ability to embrace uncertainty and doubt as leaders is important. And the ability to change and adapt with a strong connection to the company's purpose, mission, and values. I think we should not forget about that. I think the other thing is, in terms of business model innovation, and we talked a little bit about it before, how do you look at a diversified portfolio and have a diversified portfolio approach, how you encourage continuous experimentation, how you do ongoing sprints, et cetera, et cetera. Then when you look at technology, I think maybe a lot of people look before technology is what is the certain fix that the technology X is going to do. And I'm saying let's look at the technology as a horizontal way and the power of interconnections across multiple technologies to really start to reimagine the opportunities they create. And so what is the breakthroughs, or what are the convergence of technology breakthroughs that enable you to reimagine a new business model, for example? Build and orchestrate ecosystems we talked before, right? How it's important to have a much more fluid, much more strategically competitive, much more have them as a competitive mode from a strategic perspective in a complex environment. Understanding early signals is extremely important, is part of strategic foresight, is how to understand early signals and monitor them on a continuous process, because some of the weak signals or early signals will become big things. And if you're missing it at the beginning, you're at a disadvantage. The other thing is about KPIs. Are all KPIs still fit for purpose? Or we need to think about some new KPIs? Are some KPIs about how you support risk-taking? How you have a KPI about value creation? How is it about growth that is based on higher value, better efficiency, and more sustainability, et cetera? Culture of learning, extremely important, right? How we, in the world today of human and machine, when learning is continuous all the time, it's not like an annual program at a given day or a given month. It's a continuous learning all the time. So the culture of learning is extremely important. Applying neuroscience, as we talked before, through different aspects of work design, and also enable your people to express their own agency. I think how we get through neuroscience, how we create an environment when our people, including us, maximize their agency and really being augmented by the intersection of human and machine. How you transform your transformation to be much more nonlinear, continuous, shorter sprints, how you adapt, how you create no regret moves, how you anchor it in your values and purpose and so on. And the last thing, as I mentioned before, is can you adopt the principles of superfluid enterprise? And again, that's not going to happen overnight, but over a period of time. But starting to think about less hierarchy, more automation, more system thinking principles, more network distributed models that I think will help you as you start to think about the new nature of the organization.
Gil, it has been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It was my pleasure as well.